The moment Josie Carter saw the bill of sale with her name on it, she knew her father's debts had finally destroyed what remained of her life. She stood in the dusty parlor of their modest home outside Willcox, Arizona, watching a stranger in an expensive suit count out gold coins onto the worn table while her father refused to meet her eyes. The year was 1882, and at 22 years old, Josie had believed she might still have a chance at a normal life despite the whiskey bottles that multiplied in dark corners and the creditors who came calling with increasing frequency. That hope shattered like glass on stone when Marcus Finch, gambler and saloon owner from Tombstone, smiled at her with teeth too white and eyes too cold. "The debt is settled then," Finch said, his voice smooth as snake oil. "Miss Carter, collect your things. We leave within the hour." Her father, Thomas Carter, finally looked up from the coins scattered before him. His face was gaunt, hollowed out by guilt and alcohol, and for just a moment Josie saw something that might have been regret flicker across his features. But then his trembling hand reached for the money, and that brief flash of humanity vanished. "Papa, please," Josie whispered, her voice breaking despite her determination to remain strong. "There has to be another way." "There is no other way, girl," he muttered, already pushing coins into his pockets with shaking fingers. "Finch owns the debt. He owns everything. This is how it has to be." Marcus Finch crossed the room toward her, and Josie fought the urge to step back. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. He was a handsome man in his mid-30s, she supposed, with dark hair swept back from a high forehead and clothes that spoke of money won at card tables across the territory. But his handsomeness was a veneer over something rotten, something she could sense the way animals sense a coming storm. "I am not an unreasonable man, Miss Carter," Finch said, reaching out to lift a strand of her auburn hair between his fingers. She jerked away, and his smile widened. "You will work in my establishment. I have uses for a woman of your particular assets. Beauty such as yours is rare in these parts, and men will pay handsomely for the pleasure of your company." "I will not be a whore," Josie said through clenched teeth, her green eyes blazing with a fury that made even Finch pause. He laughed, a sound like coins rattling in a tin cup. "We shall see what you will and will not do, my dear. Your father signed over your indenture papers. For the next 5 years, you belong to me. What I say goes, unless you want to see him hang for theft and fraud. The territorial judge is a personal friend of mine, and I have more than enough evidence to ensure your dear Papa spends his final days at the end of a rope." Josie looked at her father, waiting for him to defend her, to stand up and be the man he had been before her mother died 6 years ago. But Thomas Carter had already turned away, counting his coins like a miser with his gold. The man who had once carried her on his shoulders and called her his little wildflower was gone, replaced by this hollow shell who traded his daughter for drinking money. She packed her belongings in silence, her hands steady even as tears threatened to spill down her cheeks. Everything she owned fit into a single carpet bag, a testament to how far the Carter family had fallen. There were 2 dresses, one for everyday wear and one that had been her mother's for special occasions. A few undergarments, a hairbrush with a cracked handle, a small Bible her grandmother had given her, and hidden at the very bottom, wrapped in a handkerchief, a tintype photograph of her parents on their wedding day, back when her father's eyes had been clear and full of hope. The journey to Tombstone took the better part of a day, riding in Finch's fancy carriage behind a matched pair of grays. Josie sat as far from him as the confined space allowed, staring out at the Arizona landscape as it rolled past. The October sun beat down mercilessly, turning the desert into a shimmering expanse of browns and golds. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels, their arms raised in eternal surrender to the relentless sky. In the distance, mountains rose purple and hazy, promising coolness that never quite materialized. Finch tried to make conversation at first, telling her about the Silver Palace, his saloon and gambling hall in Tombstone. How it was the finest establishment in town, frequented by miners flush with silver from the claims that dotted the hills, by cowboys bringing cattle up from Mexico, by businessmen and outlaws and everyone in between. How she would have fine clothes and good food and a comfortable room, luxuries her father could never have provided. "All you have to do is be pleasant," he said, his tone almost reasonable. "Smile at the customers, serve drinks, encourage them to spend their money at my tables. Perhaps sit on a lap or two, let a man steal a kiss, nothing too terrible for a girl of your charms. And when that is not enough," Josie asked quietly, still not looking at him, "when they want more than smiles and kisses, what then?" Finch was silent for a long moment. "Then you will do what is necessary to keep me happy. Or you will learn that there are far worse fates than working in a saloon. I own you, Miss Carter. The sooner you accept that, the easier your life will be." They arrived in Tombstone as the sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the wooden buildings in shades of amber and crimson. The town was bigger than Josie had expected, sprawling and chaotic, with the constant sound of industry ringing from the mines. Men moved through the dusty streets in a steady stream, and the air itself seemed charged with the electric promise of money to be made and lost. The Silver Palace stood on Allen Street, a two-story building with a false front that made it look even taller. Fresh paint gleamed white in the fading light, and through the windows, Josie could already see the glow of oil lamps and hear the tinny sound of a piano. Finch led her through a side entrance and up a narrow staircase to the second floor. The hallway was carpeted in red, with doors lining both sides. He opened one near the end and gestured her inside. "Your room," he announced. "I trust you will find it adequate." It was nicer than anywhere Josie had lived in the past 5 years, with a real bed instead of a straw mattress, a washstand with a porcelain basin, even a small wardrobe and a chair by the window. But the lock was on the outside of the door, and the window bars were decorative ironwork that would prevent any escape. This was not a room. It was a gilded cage. "You will start work tomorrow evening," Finch said from the doorway. "I will have Delilah bring you appropriate clothing. Get some rest, Miss Carter. You are going to need it." The lock clicked behind him, and Josie was alone. She set her carpet bag on the bed and walked to the window, looking down at the street below. People moved like ants, pursuing their own dreams and schemes, unaware of the girl trapped above them. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and finally let the tears come, silent sobs that shook her shoulders as the last of her hope drained away. That first night in the Silver Palace, Josie barely slept. The building came alive after dark, filled with raucous laughter, the clink of glasses, the angry shouts of men who had lost too much at the tables. Several times she heard footsteps in the hallway, heard doors opening and closing, heard the high-pitched laughter of women that sounded forced and brittle. When she finally dozed off near dawn, her dreams were troubled things full of dark eyes and grasping hands. A knock on the door woke her late in the morning. A woman's voice called out, "It is Delilah. Mr. Finch sent me with breakfast and your work clothes." Josie sat up, disoriented and exhausted. "Come in." The lock turned, and a woman entered carrying a tray laden with food and draped with garments. Delilah was perhaps 30, with blonde hair piled high on her head, and a face that might have been pretty before hard living etched lines around her eyes and mouth. She wore a dress cut low enough to display impressive cleavage, and her movements had the practiced grace of someone long accustomed to being watched. "Eat up, honey," Delilah said, setting the tray on the small table. "You are going to need your strength. Mr. Finch runs a tight ship, and he does not tolerate weakness." "What exactly am I expected to do?" Josie asked, eyeing the dresses Delilah had brought. They were beautiful in their way, made of silk and satin in jewel tones, but they were also scandalously revealing, with necklines that plunged and skirts that would show her ankles. Delilah's expression softened slightly. "You are new to this, are you not?" Finch usually breaks in his girls a bit more gently, but I suppose he saw something special in you. She sat down on the edge of the bed with a sigh. "Listen, the work is not so terrible if you learn the rules. You serve drinks, you laugh at bad jokes, you let the men think they have a chance with you. Most nights, that is all it is. But some nights, when a high roller is losing badly or when Finch needs to sweeten a deal, he will expect more. You understand me?" "I understand that I have been sold like cattle," Josie said bitterly. "That I am a prisoner here." "We are all prisoners of something," Delilah replied. "At least here you have a roof over your head and food in your belly. That is more than most women in the territory can say." She stood up and gestured to the dresses. "The red one will look good with your coloring. Put it on tonight and do your best to smile. Maybe you will get lucky and Finch will be in a generous mood." After Delilah left, locking the door behind her once more, Josie picked at the breakfast of eggs and toast and coffee. The food was good, far better than the meager fare she had been living on for years, but it tasted like ashes in her mouth. She was trapped, truly trapped, and she could see no way out that did not end with her father dead or her own life in ruins. The afternoon dragged by with agonizing slowness. Josie tried to read her Bible, seeking comfort in familiar verses, but the words seemed to blur before her eyes. She paced the small room like a caged animal, examining every corner for a weakness, some way to escape. But the window bars were solid iron, the door was thick oak with a heavy lock, and even if she could somehow get out, where would she go? She had no money, no friends in Tombstone, nowhere to run. As the sun began to set, Delilah returned with another woman, a dark-haired beauty named Rosalie who carried a box of cosmetics and hairpins. Without asking permission, they set to work transforming Josie from a rancher's daughter into a saloon girl. They laced her into the red dress, which pushed her breasts up and cinched her waist until she could barely breathe. They painted her lips crimson and dusted her cheeks with rouge. They piled her auburn hair on top of her head in an elaborate arrangement that left her neck bare and vulnerable. When they finally let her look in the small mirror, Josie barely recognized herself. The woman staring back at her was beautiful in a hard, glittering way, a woman who looked like she belonged in the Silver Palace. But her eyes were still her own, green and frightened and burning with trapped fury. "Perfect," Rosalie said with satisfaction. "The men are going to lose their minds over you. Just remember to smile," Delilah added, her voice kind despite the circumstances. "And if anyone gets too rough, you signal to Big Mike at the bar. He will handle it. Finch does not like his merchandise damaged." They led her downstairs as the saloon was opening for the evening. The main room was enormous, with a long, polished bar running along one wall, gaming tables scattered throughout, and a small stage where the piano player was already warming up. Crystal chandeliers that must have cost a fortune hung from the ceiling, their light reflecting off mirrors and gilt trim. It was gaudy and overwhelming and loud, and Josie felt her carefully maintained composure begin to crack. Marcus Finch materialized at her elbow, resplendent in a black suit with a red brocade vest. "Miss Carter, how lovely you look," he said, taking her arm in a grip that was just a fraction too tight. "Let me introduce you to your new life." He paraded her around the saloon, showing her off to the other girls and the staff like a prize mare. The bartender was indeed a huge man called Big Mike, with arms like tree trunks and a face that had been broken and reset multiple times. The dealers at the various tables all wore matching vests and expressions of careful neutrality. The piano player was a wizened old man who looked like he had been born at that bench. And the girls, perhaps a dozen of them in total, ranged from fresh-faced teenagers to women in their 30s who had the brittle hardness of those who had survived too much. "You will start by serving drinks," Finch instructed, leading her to a corner table where 4 men were already playing poker. "These gentlemen need refills. Smile, ask them nicely, and bring what they request. Simple enough even for you, I trust." Josie bit back the sharp retort that rose to her lips and forced herself to smile at the card players. "Good evening, gentlemen. What can I bring you from the bar?" They looked up from their cards, and she watched their expressions change as they took in her appearance. One man, fat and balding with whiskey stains on his shirt, let his gaze travel slowly down her body in a way that made her skin crawl. Another, younger and better dressed, offered her a genuine smile. "Whiskey all around, darling," the fat man said. "And maybe you could stay and bring us some luck." "I will bring your drinks," Josie replied, her smile not wavering despite the sick feeling in her stomach. The next several hours passed in a blur of forced smiles and wandering hands and crude comments that she had to laugh off like they were charming instead of degrading. Her feet ached from the impractical shoes Delilah had given her, and her face hurt from maintaining a pleasant expression. Men grabbed at her waist, her hands, tried to pull her into their laps. Some were relatively polite about it, accepting her gentle refusals with good humor. Others were insistent, aggressive, their breath hot with whiskey and their fingers hard enough to leave bruises. Through it all, Marcus Finch watched from his position at the main poker table, his cold eyes tracking her every movement. She understood the unspoken message clearly enough. This was her life now. She belonged to him, body and soul, and he would use her however he saw fit. It was nearly midnight when everything changed. A man walked into the Silver Palace, and the very air seemed to shift in response. Josie noticed him immediately, not just because he was tall, though he was easily over 6 feet, or because he moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. There was something else, something in the way other men unconsciously made room for him, the way conversation briefly faltered as he made his way to the bar. He was a cowboy. That much was obvious from his well-worn boots and the weather-beaten hat he removed as he entered. His clothes were clean but simple, a blue work shirt and dark trousers held up with suspenders, a bandana tied loosely around his neck. His face was tanned from years in the sun, with strong features and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. But it was his eyes that caught and held Josie's attention, gray as a winter sky and filled with a quiet intelligence that seemed at odds with the rough exterior. He ordered a whiskey from Big Mike and stood at the bar, surveying the room with those steady gray eyes. When his gaze passed over Josie, something flickered in their depths, quickly hidden, but she felt it like a physical touch. Then he turned away, drinking his whiskey in measured sips, seemingly content to observe rather than participate in the chaos around him. "Who is that?" Josie asked Delilah when she came to collect empty glasses from the table Josie was serving. Delilah followed her gaze and her eyebrows rose. "That is Harrison Noble. He has a ranch south of here, runs cattle and breaks horses. Good man from what I hear. Honest. Does not come to town often, and when he does, he usually keeps to himself. Why do you ask?" Before Josie could answer, Marcus Finch appeared at her side, his hand clamping down on her shoulder hard enough to make her wince. "Mr. Noble," he called out, his voice carrying across the saloon. "How good to see you. Come, join my table. I am sure we can arrange a game worthy of your talents." Harrison Noble turned, and for a moment his expression was carefully neutral. Then he shrugged and carried his whiskey over to the poker table in the center of the room, the one where Finch held court like a king on his throne. "I do not have much interest in cards tonight," Harrison said, his voice a low rumble that somehow cut through the noise. "Just came in for a drink and to hear the news." "Nonsense," Finch said, gesturing to an empty chair. "One game just for fun. Unless the great Harrison Noble is afraid of losing." It was a calculated insult, delivered with a smile, and Josie saw Harrison's jaw tighten. But he set his glass down and took the offered chair, pulling money from his pocket and placing it on the table. "One game," he agreed. Finch's smile widened. "Excellent. Miss Carter, bring Mr. Noble a fresh drink, and do try to help him relax. He looks entirely too tense." Josie approached the table with a new glass of whiskey, acutely aware of Finch watching her every move. She set the drink in front of Harrison and started to step back, but Finch caught her wrist. "Stay here," he commanded. "Stand behind Mr. Noble." I find a beautiful woman brings out the best in a man's playing. She had no choice but to obey, positioning herself behind Harrison's chair. From this vantage point, she could see his cards when he picked them up, could see the way his hands remained steady even though he must have known she was there. Up close, she noticed small details she had missed from across the room. The scar that cut through his left eyebrow. The calluses on his hands that spoke of hard physical labor. The way he smelled of leather and horse and clean sweat, so different from Finch's cloying cologne. The game began, and Josie quickly realized that both men were skilled players. They faced off against three others, minors by the look of them, but it was really a contest between Finch and Harrison. The others folded early and often, clearly outmatched. The pot grew steadily as the two men raised and called, each one reading the other, searching for tells and weaknesses. "You have done well for yourself, Noble," Finch said as he studied his cards. "I hear your ranch is quite successful. All that hard work must be exhausting, though. Do you never wish for something more exciting, more profitable?" "I like my life just fine," Harrison replied, his tone even. "Honest work suits me." "Honest work," Finch repeated, investing the words with mockery. "How terribly noble of you, Noble. But surely you must get lonely out there all by yourself. A man has needs after all." His eyes flicked to Josie, then back to his cards. "Perhaps I could arrange some company for you. For the right price, of course." Josie felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but Harrison's expression never changed. He laid down 3 cards and drew 3 more, his movements economical and precise. "I will manage," he said quietly. The game continued, the tension at the table ratcheting higher with each passing hand. The pot grew to include not just money but markers for debts owed, deeds to property, even a gold pocket watch that one of the miners threw in before folding in disgust. Finch was enjoying himself immensely, she realized. This was not about money for him. This was about power, about proving himself superior to a man like Harrison Noble who had something he could never possess, no matter how many card games he won. They reached a final hand, with the pot large enough that men from across the saloon had gathered to watch. Finch dealt the cards himself, his fingers moving with practiced ease. Josie watched Harrison's face as he examined his hand, but she could read nothing there. He might have been holding aces or nothing at all. "I think we should make this interesting," Finch said suddenly, leaning back in his chair. The pot is substantial, but I have something else to wager, something unique. He reached up without looking and caught Josie's hand, pulling her forward so that she stumbled against the back of Harrison's chair. I will wager Miss Carter here 5 years of her indenture papers. She is beautiful, obedient, and entirely at the disposal of whoever owns her contract. What do you say, Noble? Does that interest you? The room fell silent. Josie could not breathe, could not think beyond the horror of being wagered like a prize in a game of cards. She was not a person to Marcus Finch, she was property, something to be used as he saw fit. Harrison turned slightly in his chair, looking up at her for the first time since the game began. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Josie saw something that made her heart stutter. There was fury in Harrison Noble's gaze, carefully banked but burning hot. And beneath that, something that might have been compassion. That is a human being you are talking about, Harrison said, his voice low and dangerous. Not a poker chip. Nevertheless, she is mine to wager if I choose, Finch replied. Her father sold her to me legally. I have the papers to prove it, so the question stands. Do you want her or not? Harrison looked at Josie for another long moment, and she found herself silently pleading with him. She did not know this man, had no reason to trust him, but there was something in his eyes that made her think he might be different from Marcus Finch, that he might actually see her as a person rather than an object to be used. What would you want in return? Harrison asked finally. Finch spread his hand on the table, revealing a flush, hearts running from 10 to ace. Everything in the pot, he said. Every dollar, every deed, every marker, and your ranch. I want the deed to your ranch, Noble. All or nothing. The crowd around the table murmured in shock. The Noble ranch was worth far more than everything else on the table combined. It was prime grazing land with water rights and a sturdy house and outbuildings, a place that had been in Harrison's family for over a decade. To wager it on a single hand of cards was madness. And if I win? Harrison asked, his voice still eerily calm. Then you get everything here, including the girl and her papers. You can do whatever you want with her. Sell her again, keep her as a servant, put her to work on your back if that is your pleasure. I care not. Josie wanted to scream, to run, to do anything except stand there while these men decided her fate like she was a piece of livestock. But Finch's hand was still on her wrist, his grip crushing, a silent reminder that she had no say in this. She was property, and property did not get to object. Harrison Noble looked at his cards, then at Finch, then one more time at Josie. Something passed across his face there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. Then he nodded. All right, he said. I will see your flush. He laid down his cards one by one, 10 of spades, Jack of spades, Queen of spades, King of spades, and finally, his expression never changing, the ace of spades, with a straight flush. The room exploded into noise, men shouting and slapping Harrison on the back and demanding drinks all around. Marcus Finch sat frozen in his chair, staring at the cards on the table like he could not quite believe what he was seeing. His face had gone white, then red, and his hands clenched into fists. You cheated, he said, his voice shaking with rage. You must have cheated. There is no other explanation. I did not cheat, Harrison said, standing up from the table. He was even taller than Josie had realized, topping Finch by several inches, and the gambler actually flinched back. You dealt the cards yourself, in front of witnesses. I won fair and square, and you know it. The game is invalid, Finch snarled, rising to face him. I was drunk. I did not know what I was doing. You had 3 drinks all night, and I watched you water down 2 of them, Harrison replied. You were stone sober, and you know it. Now honor your wager. I want the papers for Miss Carter, and I want them now. For a moment, Josie thought Finch might actually attack him. The gambler's hand moved toward his jacket, where she knew he kept a derringer, and the entire saloon seemed to hold its breath. But then Big Mike moved out from behind the bar, a bung starter held casually in one massive hand, and Finch's hand fell back to his side. "Fine," Finch bit out. "Take her. She is more trouble than she is worth anyway." He looked at Josie with such venom that she actually took a step back. "You will regret this, Noble. That girl is poison. She will ruin you just like her father ruined himself." Harrison ignored him, gathering up the contents of the pot and shoving them into his pockets. Finch left the table and stormed up the stairs, returning a few minutes later with a sheaf of papers that he threw at Harrison's chest. "There. The indenture papers, signed and legal. She is your problem now." Harrison caught the papers and examined them carefully, his gray eyes scanning every line. Apparently satisfied, he folded them and tucked them into his shirt pocket. Then he turned to Josie, who was still standing frozen beside the poker table, unable to process what had just happened. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice gentle now, "do you have belongings upstairs?" She nodded mutely. "Go get them. We are leaving." Josie fled up the stairs on shaking legs, her mind reeling. She had been in the Silver Palace for barely 24 hours, and now she was leaving with a man she did not know, a man who had just won her in a card game like she was a horse or a saddle. She did not know whether to laugh or cry or scream. In the end, she did none of those things, just grabbed her carpet bag and changed out of the scandalous red dress and back into her own simple calico, not caring that Delilah and Rosalie were watching from the hallway. When she came back downstairs, Harrison was waiting by the door, his hat already on his head. He offered her his arm like a gentleman escorting a lady to church, not a man who had just won a woman's freedom in a poker game. "Ready?" he asked. Josie put her hand on his arm and let him lead her out into the cool October night. Behind them, the Silver Palace blazed with light and noise, but she did not look back. Whatever came next, it had to be better than what she was leaving behind. They walked in silence through the dark streets of Tombstone. Most businesses were closed at this late hour, though saloons and gaming halls still spilled light and laughter onto the wooden sidewalks. Harrison kept a respectful distance, his hand never straying from where she had placed it on his arm, and Josie found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. He had won her. According to the law and those terrible papers, she belonged to him now just as surely as she had belonged to Marcus Finch. The thought made her stomach twist with fear and something else she could not quite name. But Harrison Noble did not act like a man who had just acquired property. He moved like he was escorting someone precious, steering her around mud puddles and loose boards, his entire bearing protective rather than possessive. They reached the edge of town, where horses were tethered outside a livery stable. Harrison's mount was a beautiful palomino gelding with a white mane and intelligent eyes. The horse nickered softly when it saw him, and Harrison paused to stroke its nose before turning to Josie. "This is Dusty," he said. "He is gentle if a bit spirited. Have you ridden before?" "Yes," Josie managed, finding her voice for the first time since they left the saloon. "I grew up on a ranch before everything fell apart." Harrison nodded, and she saw understanding in his eyes. "We have about an hour's ride to my place. You can ride behind me, or I can see about getting you your own mount if you would rather." "Behind you is fine," Josie said quickly. She did not want to be alone right now, even for the space between two horses. He swung up into the saddle with easy grace, then reached down to pull her up behind him. Josie settled onto the horse's back, her carpet bag clutched in one hand and the other tentatively gripping Harrison's shirt. She could feel the warmth of his body through the fabric, the solid strength of him, and tried not to think about how strange this all was. They rode out of Tombstone at an easy pace, heading south under a sky absolutely brilliant with stars. The moon was a silver crescent providing just enough light to see the trail, and the desert around them was alive with small sounds, the chirp of crickets and the distant yip of coyotes. Josie had been terrified when Finch brought her to town in his fancy carriage, but now, riding through the darkness with Harrison Noble, she felt something shift inside her chest. Not quite hope, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it. "Miss Carter," Harrison said after they had been riding for perhaps 20 minutes, "I want you to understand something. I did not win you so that I could own you. What Finch did to you, what your father did to you, it was wrong. No person should be able to sell another, no matter what the law says." Josie's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "Then why did you play that hand? Why risk everything for someone you do not even know?" She felt him shrug, the movement shifting his shoulders under her hand. "Because I could not stand by and let it happen. I have seen too much suffering in my life, too much injustice, and you looked at me with such desperate hope in your eyes that I could not walk away." They rode in silence for a few more minutes before Harrison spoke again, his voice firm with conviction. "When we get to the ranch, I am going to burn those indenture papers. You will be free, Miss Carter, free to stay and work for wages if you choose, or free to go wherever you want. I will not hold you against your will." Tears spilled down Josie's cheeks before she could stop them, hot and fast. No one had been kind to her in so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like. Her mother's death, her father's descent into alcoholism and gambling, the years of poverty and struggle, and finally the ultimate betrayal of being sold like cattle. She had built walls around her heart to survive, had told herself she did not need kindness or compassion or hope. But Harrison Noble's simple words shattered those walls like they were made of paper. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "You do not even know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," Harrison replied simply, "and because every person deserves to be free." The Noble ranch appeared in the moonlight like something from a dream. The house was a sturdy structure built of adobe and wood, with a wide covered porch that wrapped around the front and side. There was a barn, several corrals, a small bunkhouse, and various other outbuildings that spoke of a working ranch. It was not large, but it was clearly well maintained, every fence line straight and every building in good repair. Harrison helped Josie down from the horse, his hands steady on her waist, and she found herself standing in the dusty yard with her carpet bag, unsure what to do next. She was exhausted from the emotional upheaval of the past 2 days, wrung out and shaking with reaction now that the immediate danger had passed. "Come inside," Harrison said, taking her bag and leading the way to the house. "You must be tired. I will show you to the spare room, and we can talk more in the morning." The interior of the house was as well kept as the exterior, with simple furniture and clean floors, and an overall sense of order. Harrison lit a lamp and carried it down a short hallway, opening a door to reveal a small bedroom with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window with real glass. "This was going to be for ranch hands," Harrison explained, setting her bag on the bed. "But I have been managing on my own so far. You are welcome to it for as long as you need." Josie looked around the room, then at Harrison standing in the doorway with the lamp casting shadows across his face. He had given her more in the past hour than anyone had given her in years. Freedom, safety, shelter, kindness. She did not know how to begin to thank him. "Mr. Noble," she began, but he held up a hand. "Harrison, please. If we are going to be living under the same roof, we might as well use given names. And you do not need to thank me, Miss Carter. I did what anyone with a conscience should have done." "Josie," she said softly. "My name is Josie." He smiled then, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made her breath catch. "Josie," he repeated like he was tasting the name. "Get some rest. We will figure everything else out tomorrow." After he left, closing the door behind him, Josie sat down on the edge of the bed and let herself cry in earnest, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for the girl she had been before her mother died, for the father she had lost to his demons, for the 2 terrifying days in Marcus Finch's control. But she also cried with relief, with gratitude, with the overwhelming realization that she was safe. Harrison Noble had given her the most precious gift imaginable. He had given her hope. She woke to bright sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting through the house. For a moment Josie was disoriented, unsure where she was, but then memory flooded back and she sat up quickly, looking around the small room. It had not been a dream. She was really here at Harrison Noble's ranch, free from Marcus Finch. She found a pitcher of water on the dresser and washed her face and hands, then brushed out her long hair and braided it into a simple plait. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a woman with shadows under her eyes and cheeks still flushed from crying, but there was something else there too. A spark of life that had been missing for too long. Following the smell of food, Josie made her way to the kitchen and stopped in the doorway, surprised by the scene before her. Harrison stood at the stove, spatula in hand, tending to a pan of eggs and bacon with the same calm competence he seemed to bring to everything. The table was already set for 2, with fresh coffee steaming in mugs and bread sliced and ready. "Good morning," Harrison said, glancing over his shoulder. "I hope you slept well. Breakfast is almost ready." "You did not have to cook for me," Josie protested, even as her stomach growled at the sight of so much food. "I had to cook for myself anyway," Harrison replied with a shrug. "2 people is not much more work than 1. Please, sit down." She sat, feeling strange and off balance. When had anyone last cooked for her? When had anyone last cared whether she was hungry or tired or needed help? The simple kindness of it made her throat tight with emotion again, and she had to blink back tears as Harrison set a plate piled high with food in front of her. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Harrison cleared his throat. "I want to talk about what happens next," he said. "But first, I need you to understand something. You are free, Josie. Truly free. I meant what I said last night." He pulled the indenture papers from his shirt pocket and held them up. Then, deliberately, he walked to the stove and fed them into the fire 1 page at a time. Josie watched the papers curl and blacken and turn to ash, watched 5 years of enforced servitude vanish in smoke, and something hard and painful in her chest finally loosened. "Thank you," she whispered. Harrison returned to his seat and took a sip of coffee. "Now, you have some choices to make. You are welcome to stay here as long as you like, no strings attached. If you want to go back to your father's place or anywhere else, I will give you money for the stage and help you get there. Or, if you would like to stay and work, I could use the help around the ranch. I would pay you fair wages, and you would have your own space and your independence. The choice is entirely yours." Josie stared at him, trying to process the enormity of what he was offering. She could leave. She could actually leave, start over somewhere new, maybe Tucson or Phoenix or even California. She had dreamed of escape for so long that it seemed surreal to have it handed to her so easily. But where would she go? Her father had made it clear he cared more for his drinking money than for her, and she had no other family left alive. She had no skills beyond ranching and housework, no education to speak of, no prospects. And if she was being honest with herself, The thought of leaving this place, of leaving Harrison Noble after he had shown her such unexpected kindness, made her chest ache with something that felt almost like panic. "I would like to stay," she heard herself say, "if you truly do not mind. I can cook and clean and help with the horses. I am a hard worker, I promise, and I will not be any trouble." "I do not think you could be trouble if you tried," Harrison said, and there was a warmth in his voice that made her look up to meet his eyes. "You have a deal then. I will pay you $30 a month plus room and board. That is what I would pay any ranch hand, and I expect the same level of work." "Fair, more than fair," Josie agreed, her heart feeling lighter than it had in years. "When do I start? How about after you finish your breakfast?" Harrison suggested, his lips quirking in a small smile. "I have a mare that is due to foal any day now, and she could use a gentle hand. I have been told I can be too rough with the horses, though Dusty would probably disagree." They finished eating, and Harrison showed her around the ranch in the bright morning sunlight. He had about 50 head of cattle grazing on his land, along with a dozen horses in various stages of training. The pregnant mare he had mentioned was a pretty bay with a sweet disposition, and she let Josie stroke her swollen belly while Harrison explained that this would be her first foal. "I am hoping for a palomino like Dusty," he said, watching Josie with the horse. "His bloodline is excellent, and I think this mare will produce strong foals. If this goes well, I might expand the horse breeding operation. There is always a market for good working animals." As they walked, Harrison talked about his plans for the ranch, how he had inherited the land from his uncle 5 years ago and had been slowly building it up ever since. He spoke with quiet passion about the work, about the satisfaction of breeding strong horses and raising healthy cattle, about the freedom of being his own boss and making his own decisions. "I spent years working other people's ranches," he explained as they leaned against a corral fence watching the horses. "Taking orders, never having a say in how things were done. When my uncle left me this place, it was like a door opening. Suddenly I could build something that mattered, something that was mine. I know it is not much yet, but someday I want this to be one of the finest ranches in the territory." "It sounds like a good dream," Josie said softly, "a worthwhile one." Harrison glanced at her, and she felt the weight of his gaze. "What about you, Josie? What are your dreams?" No one had asked her that in so long that she had almost forgotten she was allowed to have dreams. She thought about it, watching a pair of colts playing in the corral, chasing each other in circles while their mothers grazed peacefully. "I think I just want to be free," she admitted. "To make my own choices and not have to be afraid all the time. To have a place where I belong, where I am wanted for myself, and not for what I can do for someone else. Maybe that is not much of a dream, but it is mine." "It is a fine dream," Harrison said quietly. "And you are wanted here, Josie Carter, just for yourself." Their eyes met and held, and Josie felt something shift between them, subtle as a change in the wind, but just as real. There was a connection forming, fragile and new, built on kindness and understanding, and the shared experience of survival in a hard world. She did not know what it meant yet, was not ready to examine it too closely, but she felt it all the same. The days that followed fell into a comfortable routine. Josie rose early and made breakfast while Harrison tended to the horses. They worked together through the morning, repairing fences or moving cattle or training the younger horses. At midday, they would break for lunch, usually something simple that Josie prepared, and then return to work until evening. After dinner, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the desert, talking about everything and nothing, gradually learning each other's stories. Harrison told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 16, about the years of drifting from ranch to ranch before his uncle's unexpected legacy gave him a home. He spoke carefully, choosing his words with the same precision he brought to breaking horses, but Josie could hear the pain beneath the calm exterior. He had known loss and loneliness, had built walls around his heart just like she had. She told him about her mother, who had been beautiful and kind and strong, who had died of pneumonia one bitter winter when the medicine they needed cost more than her father could afford. About watching her father crumble under the weight of grief and guilt, about the slow descent into poverty as his drinking worsened and his judgment failed, about the terror of being sold to Marcus Finch and the helpless rage of being powerless to stop it. "I hated my father for what he did," Josie admitted one evening as they sat watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I still hate him if I am being honest, but part of me understands too. He was broken, and he did not know how to fix himself. So he just kept falling until there was nothing left." "Understanding does not mean you have to forgive," Harrison said. "What he did was wrong, no matter how broken he was. You have every right to be angry." "Are you angry?" Josie asked. "At your parents for dying? At your uncle for waiting so long to give you a home?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his face turned toward the horizon where the last light was fading. "I was," he said finally. "For years I was so angry I could barely see straight. Angry at the world, at God, at everyone who had more than I did. But anger is exhausting, and eventually I got tired of carrying it. I decided to build something instead, to create rather than destroy. It has not made everything better, but it has helped." They sat in companionable silence after that, and Josie thought about his words. Could she let go of her anger at her father? Could she build something new instead of dwelling on what had been lost? She did not know, not yet, but for the first time she thought it might be possible. The bay mare went into labor on a cool November morning, and Harrison sent Josie to fetch towels and warm water while he stayed with the laboring animal. Josie had helped with birthings before, back when her family's ranch had been prosperous, but her hands still shook as she prepared everything they would need. This felt important somehow, like a test she had to pass. The foaling took several hours, and Josie stayed by Harrison's side the entire time, following his quiet instructions and offering what comfort she could to the mare. When the foal finally emerged in a rush of fluid and membranes, sliding into the straw wet and perfect, Josie felt tears spring to her eyes. "It is a filly," Harrison said, his voice rough with emotion. "Look at those markings. She is going to be beautiful." The foal was indeed marked like her sire, with the same golden coat and white mane, though her legs were darker. She struggled to her feet after just a few minutes, all wobbly legs and determination, and began nursing while her mother nickered encouragement. "You did well," Harrison told Josie, and the pride in his voice made her chest swell with happiness. "Most ranch hands would have been too rough or too timid. You have good instincts." "My mother taught me," Josie said, watching the foal. "She said you have to respect the animals, understand what they need. They can feel when you are afraid or angry and they respond to it. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was," Josie agreed softly. "I wish you could have met her. I think she would have liked you." They named the filly Sunshine, and over the following weeks, Josie found herself spending hours in the barn just watching the foal grow and learn. There was something deeply satisfying about caring for such a young life, about seeing her grow stronger and more confident each day. Harrison often joined her, the two of them standing at the stall door in comfortable silence, united in their appreciation of the small miracle they had helped bring into the world. It was during those quiet moments that Josie began to realize her feelings for Harrison were changing, deepening into something more than gratitude or friendship. She noticed small things about him that made her heart skip. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. The careful gentleness of his hands when he worked with the horses. The sound of his laugh, rare but genuine, that made warmth bloom in her chest. The way he looked at her sometimes like she was something precious, something worth protecting. She tried to tell herself it was just the situation, that she was confusing gratitude with attraction, but she knew she was lying to herself. Harrison Noble was a good man, the kind of man she had not believed existed anymore, and she was falling in love with him. The realization terrified her. She had seen what love did to her father, how it had destroyed him when her mother died. She had been under Marcus Finch's control and seen how men used the word love to justify possessing and controlling women. She did not want to be vulnerable like that, did not want to give anyone that much power over her heart, but Harrison was different. She knew that, felt it with a certainty that went bone deep. He had given her freedom when he could have kept her enslaved. He treated her as an equal, valued her opinions, respected her boundaries. He was kind without being condescending, strong without being domineering, and she found herself wanting things she had never let herself want before. A future. A family, a home that was more than just a roof over her head. Thanksgiving arrived, and Josie insisted on making a proper dinner to celebrate. Harrison protested that it was too much work, but she ignored him and spent the entire day cooking. Roasted chicken, since they did not have a turkey, stuffing made with cornbread and sage, sweet potatoes, biscuits, gravy, and an apple pie made from dried apples and precious sugar. They sat down to eat as the sun was setting, and Harrison looked at the feast spread before them with something like wonder in his eyes. "Josie, this is incredible. I have not had a meal like this since I was a boy." "Everyone deserves to celebrate," Josie said, suddenly shy. "And I wanted to thank you for everything you have done for me. I know I say it too much, but I do not know how else to express what it means." Harrison reached across the table and took her hand, his touch warm and solid. "You do not need to thank me. Having you here, sharing this with you, that is thanks enough." They ate slowly, savoring each bite, and talked about their favorite Thanksgivings from childhood. Harrison told stories about massive family gatherings in Texas before the cholera took so many lives. Josie shared memories of her mother's cooking and her father's laughter back when he had still been capable of joy. It was bittersweet, mourning what had been lost while celebrating what they had found in each other. After dinner, they moved to the porch, full and content, and Harrison produced a bottle of whiskey he had been saving. "For special occasions," he explained, pouring them each a small measure into tin cups. "And this definitely qualifies." "To new beginnings," Josie said, raising her cup. "To freedom," Harrison added, and they drank. The whiskey burned going down, warming her from the inside out, and Josie felt reckless suddenly, emboldened by the alcohol and the emotional weight of the day. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," Harrison said, his gray eyes reflecting the lamplight. "Why have you never married? You are a good man with your own land and a successful ranch. You must have had opportunities." Harrison was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkness beyond the porch. "I suppose I was waiting for the right person," he said finally. "I have known women who wanted to marry a ranch, not a man, who saw me as a means to security and nothing more, and after a while I stopped looking, told myself I was fine on my own, that I did not need anyone else." He turned to look at her, and his gaze was intense. "But I was lying to myself. Everyone needs someone, Josie. Everyone needs to be seen and known and valued for who they really are." "Is that how you see me?" Josie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "For who I really am?" "I am trying to," Harrison said. Every day I learn something new about you. Your strength, your kindness, your determination to keep going even when everything seemed hopeless. You are remarkable, Josie Carter, and I consider myself fortunate that you chose to stay." His words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning, and Josie felt her heart racing. This was a moment balanced on a knife's edge, where everything could change or everything could stay the same. She could retreat back into safety, maintain the careful distance she had been keeping, or she could take a risk. "I am glad I stayed too," she said, meeting his eyes. "More glad than I know how to say." Harrison stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her chair so their faces were level. "Josie, I need you to know something. These past weeks with you here, they have been some of the best of my life. I wake up looking forward to the day because I get to spend it with you. I find myself thinking about you when I should be thinking about work. And I know it is too soon. I know you have been through so much, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel." "What do you feel?" Josie asked, her hand coming up to rest against his cheek, feeling the roughness of stubble under her palm. "I am falling in love with you," Harrison said simply. "And it terrifies me because I do not want to pressure you or make you feel obligated after everything I have done. You are free, Josie. Free to stay or go, free to feel what you feel or not feel anything at all. But I needed you to know the truth." Josie felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were good tears this time, tears of joy and relief and overwhelming emotion. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I have been for weeks, but I was afraid to admit it, afraid it was too good to be true, that I was fooling myself, that something would come along and ruin it." Harrison's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "Nothing is going to ruin this. I promise you that. I will spend every day showing you that you can trust me, that what we have is real." "I already trust you," Josie said. "You are the first person in years that I have trusted completely." "Harrison," he kissed her then, gentle and sweet, a question rather than a demand. Josie answered by leaning into him, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, and the kiss deepened. It was not like the grabbing, groping touches she had endured at the Silver Palace. This was mutual and tender and full of promise, a beginning rather than an ending. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "Court you properly, give you time to be sure. You have been through so much, Josie. I do not want you to feel rushed." "I am sure," Josie said firmly. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, Harrison Noble, and I want to build a life with you." "Then that is what we will do," Harrison promised. "Together." They sat on the porch for hours that night, wrapped in each other's arms, making plans for the future and sharing dreams they had never dared speak aloud before. Harrison talked about expanding the ranch, about building a bigger house someday, about having a family and growing old together. Josie shared her hopes for a real home, for children who would grow up safe and loved, for a life filled with the quiet joys she had almost stopped believing in. As November turned to December, their relationship deepened and blossomed. Harrison courted her with a sweetness that made Josie's heart ache, bringing her wildflowers he found during his daily rounds, helping with her chores so she had more free time, teaching her to ride Dusty when his work did not require the horse. They stole kisses in the barn and held hands while walking the fence lines, and every day Josie fell more deeply in love. One evening in mid-December, Harrison took her into town with him to pick up supplies. Josie had been nervous about returning to Tombstone, afraid of seeing Marcus Finch or the Silver Palace again, but Harrison promised to stay by her side the entire time. They made their purchases quickly and were loading the wagon when a familiar voice called out, "Well, well." if it is not the cowboy and his whore. Josie turned to see Marcus Finch standing on the sidewalk, impeccably dressed as always but with a hardness to his face that made him look older. He had been drinking, she realized. Not falling down drunk, but enough to loosen his tongue and sharpen his cruelty. "Move along, Finch," Harrison said calmly, stepping between the gambler and Josie. "We do not want any trouble." "Of course you do not," Finch sneered. "You got what you wanted, did you not? My property, my investment, stolen from me in a crooked card game." "There was nothing crooked about it, and you know it," Harrison replied, his voice low and dangerous. "You wagered something you had no right to wager and you lost. Now leave us alone." "I heard you two are playing house out at your little ranch," Finch continued, ignoring Harrison's warning. "Tell me, Noble, have you tired of her yet? Because when you do, I would be happy to take her back. Maybe train her properly this time, teach her what she is really good for." Harrison's hands clenched into fists, and Josie saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. But before he could respond, she stepped around him and faced Finch herself. "I am not property," she said, her voice ringing clear and strong. "Not yours, not anyone's. Harrison set me free, which is something you would never have done. And I chose to stay with him because he is a good man, the kind of man you could never be if you lived 1,000 years. So you can take your insults and your threats and choke on them, Marcus Finch, because I am done being afraid of you." Finch's face flushed dark red, and for a moment Josie thought he might actually strike her. But a crowd had gathered, drawn by the confrontation, and several of the men were watching with expressions that suggested they would not take kindly to seeing a woman hit. After a long, tense moment, Finch turned on his heel and stalked away, disappearing into the nearest saloon. Harrison pulled Josie into his arms, holding her tight. "You were magnificent," he said into her hair. "I have never seen anything braver." Josie was shaking with reaction, adrenaline making her knees weak, but she felt triumphant too. She had faced down the man who had terrorized her and reclaimed her power. "I meant every word," she said. "I am not afraid of him anymore. I am not afraid of anything as long as I have you." They finished loading the wagon and headed back to the ranch, and that night Harrison proposed. They were sitting by the fire after dinner, Josie mending a shirt and Harrison reading a newspaper that was only a week old, when he suddenly set down the paper and knelt before her chair. "Marry me," he said without preamble. "I know it has only been a few months. I know some people will say it is too fast, but I do not care. I love you, Josie Carter. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to build this ranch with you, raise a family with you, grow old with you. So please, will you marry me?" Josie set down her mending with trembling hands, tears already streaming down her face. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I love you, Harrison. I want all of those things too." Harrison pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the firelight. "This was my mother's," he explained as he slid it onto her finger. "My uncle saved it for me, hoping I would find the right woman someday. I think she would have loved you." "I will treasure it always," Josie promised, looking at the ring on her hand, the physical proof that this was real, that she was truly going to marry this wonderful man. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Wilcox, a town closer to the ranch and less tainted by bad memories than Tombstone. The preacher was an elderly man with kind eyes who asked no questions about their brief courtship, and the witnesses were ranchers from neighboring properties who Harrison had helped at various times. Josie wore her mother's dress, altered to fit, and Harrison wore his best suit, and when they exchanged vows, Josie felt her heart so full she thought it might burst. I, Harrison Noble, take you, Josie Carter, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. In sickness and health, in poverty and wealth, in joy and sorrow, I will stand by your side. I, Josie Carter, take you, Harrison Noble, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. Through whatever trials may come, I will be your partner, your friend, and your love. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to Josie's eyes, and she heard a few of the witnesses sniffle. They celebrated with a simple meal at the ranch, and that night, in the bed they would now share, Harrison made love to her with a gentleness that erased the last shadows of fear from her heart. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. The ranch required constant work, and there were times when money was tight and the future uncertain. A drought that spring killed some of their cattle and dried up water sources, forcing them to dig new wells and move the herd to fresh grazing. Sunshine the filly developed a leg infection that required careful nursing to prevent permanent damage. And in July, word reached them that Thomas Carter had died, found in a ditch outside a saloon in Tucson with an empty whiskey bottle by his side. Josie grieved, but not for the man who had sold her. She grieved for the father she had lost years before, the man who had loved her mother and carried his daughter on his shoulders and believed in dreams. She grieved for what might have been if tragedy had not broken him. And then, with Harrison's steady support, she let it go and moved forward with her life. By the time their first anniversary arrived, the ranch was thriving. The drought had ended with monsoon rains that turned the desert green, and their cattle had multiplied. Sunshine had fully recovered and grown into a beautiful young horse that was already showing promise as a future broodmare. They had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload, and the future looked brighter than Josie had ever dared hope. On their anniversary, Harrison surprised her by taking her to the top of a nearby hill at sunset. Spread out below them was their land, their home, everything they had built together. He pulled her into his arms and held her as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "1 year ago today," Harrison said, "I married my best friend and the love of my life. It has been the best year I have ever known." "For me too," Josie agreed, leaning back against his chest. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is real, that I am this happy. After everything that happened, after all the darkness, I never thought I would find something so beautiful." "You deserve all the beauty in the world," Harrison told her, turning her in his arms so he could look into her eyes. "And I intend to spend the rest of our lives making sure you know it." Josie kissed him then, long and sweet, and when they pulled apart she had news to share that she had been keeping secret for a few weeks, waiting for the right moment. "Harrison, I am pregnant," she said, watching his face transform with joy and wonder. "We are going to have a baby." He let out a whoop of excitement and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "A baby, we are going to have a baby. When? How are you feeling? Do you need to sit down? Should you be riding horses?" "I am fine," Josie assured him, laughing at his concern. "The baby will come in early spring, around March, and I feel wonderful. Tired sometimes, and I have been queasy in the mornings, but mostly I just feel happy." They talked long into the night about names and nursery arrangements and all the ways their lives were about to change. Harrison was already making plans to add another room to the house, to hire more help so Josie would not have to work so hard, to ensure she had everything she needed. Josie felt tears of happiness spill down her cheeks as she listened to him, overwhelmed by how much this man loved her, how completely he had transformed her life. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and winter. Josie continued to help on the ranch as much as her growing belly would allow, though Harrison fussed over her constantly, always worried she was doing too much. They spent the winter evenings working on the nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and building a cradle from wood Harrison carefully selected and sanded smooth. Josie sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands moving with practiced ease even as her heart raced with anticipation. In late February, earlier than expected, Josie went into labor. Harrison sent one of the ranch hands racing for the doctor in Wilcox while he stayed by her side, holding her hand and offering what comfort he could. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, and there were moments when Harrison feared he might lose her, might lose them both. But Josie was strong, stronger than even she had known, and when their son finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Harrison wept openly with relief and joy. The baby was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and gray eyes like his father's, and Josie held him to her chest with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the fierce love that flooded through her. "What should we name him?" Harrison asked, his finger gently stroking the baby's tiny hand. "What about James?" Josie suggested. "After your father, James Noble." "James," Harrison repeated, testing the name. "It is perfect. He is perfect." He leaned over to kiss Josie's forehead, his eyes shining with tears. "You are perfect. I love you so much." "I love you too," Josie whispered, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "Thank you for giving me this life, for saving me and loving me and building this beautiful family with me." James was a good baby, healthy and strong, and he grew quickly. Harrison was a devoted father, always eager to hold his son or change him, or simply watch him sleep. Josie would often find them together in the rocking chair, Harrison reading aloud from the newspaper or telling the baby stories about the ranch, and her heart would swell with so much love she thought it might overflow. The months turned into years, and their family continued to grow. 2 years after James was born, they welcomed a daughter they named Emma, who had her mother's auburn hair and her father's steady temperament. 3 years after that came another son, Thomas, named in memory of the grandfather he would never know, but honoring the man Thomas Carter had been before tragedy broke him. The ranch prospered as well, growing from a modest operation into one of the most successful in the territory. Harrison's horse breeding program became renowned, with buyers coming from as far away as Texas and California to purchase his stock. They built a bigger house to accommodate their growing family, with a wide porch and real glass in all the windows and a parlor where Josie could entertain the other ranch wives who had become her friends. On their 10th anniversary, Josie stood on that porch watching their children play in the yard while Harrison worked with a young colt in the corral. James, now 9 years old, was tall and serious, already showing an interest in ranching that made his father beam with pride. Emma, 7, was helping her little brother Thomas build something complicated out of sticks and string, her tongue poking out in concentration. The scene was so perfect, so ordinary and extraordinary all at once, that Josie felt tears prick her eyes. Harrison finished with the colt and walked over to join her, slipping an arm around her waist and pulling her close. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "How lucky I am," Josie said softly. "How different my life could have been if you had not been in that saloon that night, if you had not been willing to risk everything for a stranger." "You were never a stranger," Harrison said. "From the moment I saw you, I felt like I knew you, like I had been waiting for you my whole life." "Do you ever regret it?" Josie asked, turning to look up at him. "Taking such a gamble, everything could have gone so wrong." Never, Harrison said firmly. Winning that card game, bringing you home, watching you blossom into the strong, confident woman you were always meant to be, it has been the greatest privilege of my life. You and our children, this ranch, this family we have built together, this is everything I ever wanted and so much more than I ever dreamed was possible. I love you, Josie said, standing on her toes to kiss him. I will love you every day for the rest of my life. And I will love you longer than that, Harrison promised. Into eternity and beyond. They stood together watching their children play as the sun began to set, painting the Arizona sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The desert wind carried the scent of creosote and sage, familiar and comforting, the smell of home. In the distance, cattle lowed and horses nickered, the sounds of a working ranch at peace with itself. Josie thought back to that terrible night in the Silver Palace, when she had believed her life was over, that she would never know freedom or happiness again. She thought about the gambler who had tried to own her and the cowboy who had set her free. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, all the pain and fear and desperate hope that had finally led her home. She had been sold to a man who lost her in a card game, won by a cowboy who gave her freedom. But she had won something too. She had won a life worth living, a love worth fighting for, and a future bright with promise. And as Harrison's arm tightened around her waist and their children's laughter rang out in the evening air, Josie knew that all the darkness she had endured had been worth it to find this light. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. James grew into a fine young man who took over more and more of the ranch work, his steady hands and patient nature making him a natural with the horses. Emma developed a gift for working with the cattle, able to calm even the most ornery steer with her gentle voice and fearless attitude. Young Thomas showed signs of being a natural businessman, already negotiating better prices for their stock than Harrison could have managed. As the children grew, so did the ranch's reputation. The noble brand became synonymous with quality horses throughout the territory and beyond. They expanded their operations, buying adjoining land and increasing their herds. Harrison and Josie became pillars of their community, respected for their hard work and generosity, always willing to help neighbors in need, just as Harrison had once helped a desperate young woman in a saloon. On their 20th anniversary, Harrison took Josie back to Wilcox for a special dinner at the hotel restaurant. They dressed in their finest clothes, Harrison in a new suit and Josie in a silk dress the color of sage, and they felt like young newlyweds again, despite the silver threading through Harrison's dark hair and the fine lines around Josie's eyes. Over dinner, they reminisced about the journey that had brought them together, all the trials and triumphs of 2 decades of marriage. They talked about the early days when money was tight and the future uncertain, about the joy of watching their children grow, about the satisfaction of building something lasting and meaningful together. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Josie asked, her hand finding Harrison's across the table. "When you brought me to the ranch." "I said a lot of things that night," Harrison replied with a smile. "Which part do you mean?" "You said that every person deserves to be free," Josie said softly. "And you gave me that freedom without asking for anything in return. You gave me a choice, Harrison. You gave me my life back. And you chose to stay," Harrison said, bringing her hand to his lips. "You chose me, chose us, and that has made all the difference." "I was just a cowboy with a dream, Josie. You made that dream into a reality." "We made it together," Josie corrected. "Everything good in my life I built with you beside me. You are my partner, my best friend, my love. You are the best decision I ever made." After dinner, they walked through the town in the cool evening air, hand in hand like young lovers. Wilcox had grown over the years, adding new businesses and residences, but the church where they had married still stood at the center of town, its white walls gleaming in the moonlight. "Should we go inside?" Harrison asked, gesturing to the church. "For old time's sake." They slipped through the unlocked door into the quiet sanctuary, lit only by moonlight streaming through the windows. The pews were empty, the air still and peaceful, and Josie felt transported back in time to that December day when she had walked down this aisle in her mother's dress, trembling with hope and fear and overwhelming love. "I would marry you all over again," Harrison said, pulling her close in the spot where they had exchanged vows. "Right here, right now, if you would have me." "I would," Josie said, looking up into his beloved face. "Every day for the rest of my life I would choose you." They kissed there in the moonlit church, renewing vows they had never broken, celebrating the love that had sustained them through every challenge. And when they finally pulled apart, Josie felt a sense of completion, of a circle closing and opening again, the promise of more years to come. More children followed, 2 more daughters and another son, filling their house with noise and laughter and endless activity. The older children helped raise the younger ones, teaching them to ride and rope and handle the animals. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the largest operations in southern Arizona. Harrison's hair went fully gray, and Josie's auburn was streaked with silver, but their love remained as strong as ever, tested by time and proven true. They faced sorrows as well as joys. Emma married a good man from a neighboring ranch, but died in childbirth at just 24, leaving behind a baby girl that Josie and Harrison raised as their own. Thomas was thrown from a horse and broke his leg so badly he walked with a limp for the rest of his life. There were years of drought and years of flood, seasons when cattle died and crops failed, times when money was tight despite their best efforts. But through it all, Harrison and Josie remained steadfast partners, facing every challenge together, supporting each other through grief and celebrating each victory. Their love became the foundation upon which their entire family was built, a testament to the power of kindness and courage and unwavering commitment. When they had been married 30 years, their children threw them a grand anniversary party, inviting everyone from the surrounding ranches and towns. The celebration was held at the ranch, with long tables set up in the yard and enough food to feed an army. There was music and dancing and toasts that went on for hours, with each speaker praising Harrison and Josie not just for their success, but for the example they had set, the way they had shown that love built on respect and equality could weather any storm. James, now a man of 31 with children of his own, stood up to offer the final toast. "My parents' story began in darkness," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "My mother was sold like property, stripped of her dignity and freedom, facing a future of servitude and despair. My father was a solitary man with a dream and the courage to risk everything for a stranger. What they built together, this ranch, this family, this community of people who support and care for each other, it all began with a single act of kindness and a leap of faith." He raised his glass, and everyone followed suit. "To Harrison and Josie Noble, the best parents anyone could ask for and the best example of what marriage should be. May we all be lucky enough to find a love like theirs." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and Josie felt tears streaming down her face as she looked around at all these people, this life they had built from nothing but hope and hard work and love. Harrison pulled her close, and she buried her face in his shoulder, overwhelmed with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest, "for everything. for seeing me when I was invisible, for believing in me when I had stopped believing in myself, for giving me this beautiful life." "You gave me just as much," Harrison said, his voice rough with his own tears. "You took a lonely cowboy and made him a husband, a father, a better man than he ever could have been alone. I am the lucky one, Josie. I am the one who won the hand that changed everything." They danced that night under the stars, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and friends, and Josie thought about the long road that had brought them here. The pain and fear of her early years had never fully left her, but they had been transformed into something else, into empathy and strength, and a deep appreciation for the precious gift of freedom. She had been tested by fire and emerged stronger, and she had found in Harrison a partner who saw and valued that strength. As the years continued to pass, they slowed down, handing more of the ranch work to their children and grandchildren, content to spend their days together on the porch watching the sunset and remembering. They had lived through so much, survived so much, built so much, and now they could rest and enjoy the fruits of their labor. On a cool October evening, 47 years after Harrison had won Josie in that fateful card game, they sat together on the porch as they had countless times before. Josie's hair was pure silver now, her face lined with age but still beautiful, and Harrison's once powerful frame had thinned, his movements slower but still steady. They held hands as they watched their great-grandchildren playing in the yard where their own children had once played. "Do you remember that night at the Silver Palace?" Josie asked softly. "When you walked in and everything changed." "I remember thinking you looked like a wildflower trapped in a hothouse," Harrison said. "Beautiful but wilting, desperate for sun and rain and room to grow. I remember the way you looked at me, with such hope in your eyes that I could not look away." "I thought you were my last chance," Josie admitted. "The universe giving me one final opportunity to escape, and you were so much more than I ever dared hope for. You were not just my rescue, Harrison. You were my future, my home, my heart." "And you were mine," Harrison said, raising her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her weathered knuckles. "Every day with you has been a gift. Every moment has been precious. If I had to do it all over again, I would not change a single thing." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The ranch spread out before them, thriving and beautiful, a living testament to everything they had built together. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, horses nickered in the corrals, and smoke rose from the chimneys of the houses where their children and grandchildren lived. All of them part of this empire of love that had started with a single act of courage. "I love you," Josie said, her voice thick with emotion. "I have loved you every day for 47 years, and I will love you forever." "Forever and a day," Harrison agreed, pulling her close. "In this life and whatever comes after." As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast Arizona sky, they remained there together. Two souls who had found each other in the darkness and built a life filled with light. The story that had begun with a woman sold to a gambler who lost her in a card game, with a cowboy who won the hand and gave her freedom, had become something far more beautiful than either could have imagined. It had become a love story for the ages, proof that kindness and courage and unwavering commitment could transform even the darkest beginning into the most glorious ending. And as Harrison and Josie sat together in the twilight of their years, surrounded by the legacy of love they had created, they knew with absolute certainty that every struggle had been worth it. Every tear had watered the seeds of their happiness, and every moment of their shared life had been a blessing beyond measure. Their children and grandchildren would tell their story for generations, passing down the tale of the woman who was sold and the cowboy who set her free. of how they built an empire of love in the harsh Arizona desert. And the lesson would always be the same, that true love is not about possession but about freedom, not about control but about partnership, and that the greatest gifts we can give each other are dignity, respect, and the chance to become who we were always meant to be. In the end, that was Harrison and Josie's legacy, far more valuable than the successful ranch or the thriving family. They had shown everyone who knew them that love, real love, was about seeing another person truly and completely, and choosing every day to honor and cherish them. They had proven that even the darkest beginning could lead to the brightest future, that redemption was always possible, and that two broken people could heal each other and build something beautiful from the ashes of their pain. As the years wound down and their time together grew shorter, they faced the future without fear, knowing they had lived fully and loved completely. And when the day finally came that death separated them, first Harrison and then Josie a short time later, their spirits were reunited in whatever lay beyond, ready to begin the next chapter of their eternal love story. But on the ranch they had built together, life continued. Their children carried on their work, maintaining the standards of excellence and compassion that Harrison and Josie had established. The noble ranch remained a beacon of hope and hard work, a place where family came first and love was the foundation of everything. And sometimes, on quiet October evenings when the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and the desert wind carried the scent of sage, people swore they could see two figures sitting on the old porch, hands clasped together, watching the sunset over their beloved land. Whether it was memory or something more, no one could say. But everyone agreed that if love could transcend death, if devotion could echo through the years, then surely Harrison and Josie Noble's love would endure forever, a testament to the power of a single moment of courage that changed two lives and created a legacy of love that would never fade.